Hi listeners, I'm Izzy, my pronouns are they and them. Welcome to the Critical Conversations for Social Work podcast. This is Joella.
Before we start, we'd like to acknowledge the country that we're recording this episode on today and pay our respects to the Turrbal and Yagara peoples and their elders, past, present and emerging, by committing to always remembering that this always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Everyone, and welcome to the Critical Conversations for Social Work podcast. My name is Angela, and I'll be having a conversation with Jen Kaighin, who is a social worker from Kaighin. But first of all, I would just like to acknowledge the First Nations people of this land, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. I am on Yagara and Turrbal land, and I pay my respect to past, present, and emerging elders and leaders. So with me today, I have Jen Kaighin. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi.
Hi. How are you doing today?
Good, Angela. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good.
Thanks for having me on.
No worries. It's a pleasure.
I'm really excited about this conversation.
Yeah, I'm really excited about it too. It's my first time having a conversation around this topic and with a lecturer as well, so I'm very excited.
Right.
Just wanted to if you would like to introduce yourself, can you tell us a bit about who you are?
Yeah. Well, my name's Jen Kaighin, and my pronouns are she and her. We're going to be talking about queer theory, which is my pedagogy. And so in doing that, I would like to echo your acknowledgement of the traditional owners, but also acknowledge that I stand on the shoulders of the elders of the queer community who have gone before me, who have fought fights and struggled so that I can live the life that I live, and that others coming after me can live a better life than they lived. And so about me, I've been teaching here for 20 years, which just is a crazy thought that it's been 20 years. Before I started here, I was a youth worker. I worked with homeless, mainly homeless young people, really highly marginalised young people. I started in country Victoria and then moved to Darwin and then Melbourne and then in Brisbane. I was also the youth policy officer for Brisbane City Council before I started teaching here. I'm also a member of the queer community. I'm a very proud member of the queer community. I'm a cisgendered lesbian. I'm a lesbian parent. I've always been out in my workplaces. I decided very early on that I wanted to role model being out and being proud of my identity. It hasn't always been easy, but for me, it's always been important. I know that not everyone can do that, but for me, that's what's been important. And so, that's basically who I am.
Wow, that's great. Thank you so much for sharing a bit about yourself. It sounds like you have a wealth of knowledge, in some different areas.
Yeah, been around the block a couple of times.
Yeah, that's great. Can you tell us a little bit about the pedagogy that you work from or the pedagogy that you use in your practice?
Yeah, so, I mean, just kind of the brief overview, I guess, is that my pedagogy is informed by critical theory and social justice and anti-oppressive practice. But the lens that I view all of that through is queer theory. So everything's slightly rainbow coloured.
And how long have you been using this lens for?
So I guess I came to queer practice before I came to queer theory.
Okay.
And so it wasn't a theory that I learned at uni, And so, but being queer, I always tried to queer my workplaces. That was part of my commitment to always being out. And so I was always saw myself as a queer practitioner.
Right.
One of my proudest achievements in practice land was being one of a small group of people who wrote the submission for Open Doors Youth Service 20 years ago. And Open Doors is, it remains the only fully funded queer youth service in Queensland.
Oh, really?
And being part of that group was part of a journey that had kind of come through lots of youth work that I'd been doing, me and others had been doing, trying to support queer young people in education and in all kinds of youth work settings. And so being able to get Open Doors off the ground, for me, really legitimately is something that I'm really proud of.
Yeah.
Once I started teaching, I kind of set myself the task to learn more about queer theory, so I could make those links between theory and practice. Here at uni, we teach the theory first and then you go and do the practice. I was kind of going, I've done this practice, so now what's the theory that kind of helps me understand that practice? And I was thinking about it in thinking about this conversation that we were going to have, and queer practice helped me see the injustices, so it helped me to work actively toward challenging those injustices, on individual levels with the young people that I worked with, and on more, systemic and structural levels. Queer theory helped me understand the discourses that lay behind those injustices. And so for me, that was the layer that I think was missing. So queer practice, when I reflected on it, queer practice can feel like banging your head against a wall, because there's so much opposition to trying to support queer young people particularly, but there's so much opposition to that. It's so hard to get stuff through schools. I mean, things are changing now, but, I'm also talking 20 years ago when I started, more than that, 30 years ago when I started, it was hard work, so it feels like banging your head against a wall, but queer theory can help you see pathways through that. So queer theory helps me understand how hetero and cisnormativity is woven through everything, so how identities are shaped, how power and privilege works. And once you see that, then you see what's at the heart of the injustices. There's still lots of banging your head against the wall, though. It's still hard, but you can understand the discourses a bit more.
You keep on mentioning about like banging your head against the wall. Can you talk about, I guess, this opposition that you're fighting against? Like, I guess, what is it that what are these barriers that young queer people are experiencing? And like what is this thing that I guess you're advocating for?
Well, like some of my work years ago was trying to support queer young people through their school experience, their education experiences, because we know that queer young people find find schools to be unsafe. I mean, the research tells us that school and family are the two most unsafe places for queer young people. Physically unsafe, emotionally unsafe, unsafe in all the ways. And so, some of my early work, me and others, was about trying to get peer support programs into schools, and trying to get stuff into schools is just, that really is banging your head against a wall, because the principal will say, oh, no, the P&C won't let me do that. And the P&C will go, oh, no, the principal wouldn't let us do that. And so, they keep on putting blocks up as as someone who, as a lesbian parent, and also someone who's done, research and tried to do law reform kind of work in that space. I mean, that's such a hot button issue, children and parenting and queer is a really hot button issue. That's where you hit the right wing kind of conservative concerns about it.
Yeah.
So that's where the banging your head against a brick wall stuff can come in at that real pointy end of the injustices. But but there's a whole lot of other stuff that's just the relentlessness of the silencing, the invisibilizing. There's just a relentlessness of it as well. So I guess, my aim, in terms of what's brought me to be interested in this kind of work, my aim really is to queer social work. Social work's had a conflicted history with working with people with diverse genders and sexes and sexualities.
Yeah, definitely.
Social work education still has hetero and cis normativity woven through it, and it's often that in itself isn't recognised.
Yeah.
And so, we keep on teaching social work concepts and practice skills without recognising that the case studies that we're using are assuming heterosexuality and cisgender. If queer is discussed, it's usually in the context of problems and stigma, and the social worker learns how to fix those problems, But the discourses that are underlying those problems aren't interrogated. So the heteronormativity, the cisnormativity, the homophobia, that's not interrogated, and I think it's because it's only been really kind of recently that we've started to really teach about queer theory. Just in the last few years, really.
I never heard about queer theory until I came to uni. I didn't know what it was. I didn't even know what the word queer meant till I came to uni.
Yeah, absolutely. And still what we're doing at uni, in this course, is we kind of have queer week, so the week with the lecture about queer theory or, queer practice,
which is awesome.
And students kind of have talked to me about queer week, and about how it's a bit bittersweet because they feel like they've finally been seen, but it's only for a week, rather than having those queer ideas embedded right throughout the course. So, quite a few students have talked to me about that bittersweetness of it. Yeah.
Jen, I noticed that you said a couple words like heteronormativity and cisgender. I was just wondering if you can unpack the definition of those if possible.
Yeah, sure. So heteronormativity is the assumption that everyone is heterosexual, and that the normativity part of it is that runs through institutions and systems. So all of our institutions and systems are all set up around this idea that everyone is happily heterosexual. That's the preferred and privileged way of being. And so that's what heteronormativity is. Cisnormativity or cisgender is it's actually cisgender is on the same side of, so it's and transgender is on the opposite side of. And so cis is when you're cisgendered, you live the gender assigned at birth.
I noticed, before, well, I was going to ask you what brought you to be interested in this pedagogy, but I guess you kind of talked about that before.
I did. Sorry, I kind of kept going. Yeah,
that's right. But I guess what I want to know is, because you said that you've always been practicing like queer, but you haven't really did the theory until you decided to study further. So I guess what made you want to study the theory? Is it just because I guess you wanted to match the theory to the work, or to better understand things?
Yeah, absolutely. It was about deepening my understanding, and I think like I was saying about how queer practice for me was about understanding the injustice and responding to the injustice, and challenging that. But there's still theory helps us understand what lies behind that injustice. Theory helps us understand those dominant discourses, whether it's queer theory or any kind of, it helps us to really understand what's going on. And so for me, learning about queer theory helped me understand my queer practice better. And I I felt an obligation to do it in a sense, because as an educator, I needed to bring theory in, so I could then teach theory. So I needed to understand the theory myself. And some of it's hard, lots of, it draws on queer theory. Queer theory, actually, the term actually emerged in 1990 or 91 at a conference. It was first coined, and it draws on feminist theory and post-structural theory, and also gay and lesbian studies that had kind of gone before. And we know, if you've read feminist theories and post-structural theories, they're quite wordy, some of the concepts are like, whoa, they make your head explode. And so queer theory kind of does the same too. It makes your head explode a little bit. But I think that just makes it even more important that we're teaching it and trying to unpack it, so students can not go, oh, that's just too hard to get my head around that stuff, because if they want to be critical practitioners, then I think they really need to get their head around queer theory.
And I guess that's why this podcast is really helpful, because we get to talk about these theories and break it down a little bit for students like me and other people listening. So, and I was just wondering, can you think of any examples where you've used queer theory in your practice? I'm not sure, if you went back to practicing after learning about queer theory, but if you can think of any examples where you may have used it in the past, we'd love to know about it.
Which is kind of where queer theory takes me, it's thinking queerly. And it isn't just about working with queer communities. David Fryer, who writes about queer theory, says to think queerly is to really think. And so queer theory helps us to challenge normativity, to ask bigger questions, about why do we assume that everyone's cisgendered or heterosexual, and what happens if we don't assume that? What could the world be like if we didn't assume that? And so queer theory helps me to ask questions about identity and privilege and power, and so Judith Butler, who's one of the founding kind of thinkers in queer theory space, helps me recognise that gendered identities aren't a given, that they're not a biological fact, that they're performed, and so we can perform our identities any way we choose. And so then we start going, well, that means that we might then choose to be cisgendered, but it's a choice. It's not an assumption. It's not a given.
It's not something that's expected you to behave in.
And then if we extend beyond gender, we might choose to be heterosexual, but again, it's a choice. So I think some people kind of go, oh, talking about queer theory, means that it's anti-heterosexual and it's anti-cis, it's telling us we're not allowed to be that. And we actually, it's not that.
Not about that.
It's just helping us understand that it's a choice that we make, And so if we start seeing those things as a choice, then other sexualities are legitimate choices. If we see cisgender as just one in a whole bunch of choices, then the power of being cisgender is called into question, we go, how does that get to be privileged? And that's where it gets challenging for people, because they see that as a loss of power. But we know as critical thinkers, power isn't a finite commodity. There's actually room for everyone, So teaching those kind of, if we're talking about how do I engage queer theory in my practice, it's teaching those ideas, teaching those ideas about identity and privilege and power, and the fact that gendered identities are performed, and that therefore we get to choose. How liberating is that we can choose? We can choose to be heterosexual, but we acknowledge that it's a choice that we've made, you know, and the whole world steers us in that direction. But if we stop and question that, then at least we understand the choices that we're making, you know, and we might choose to go in other directions, you know, we might choose multiple directions, you know, we don't need to make just one choice. And so I'm trying to queer our social work and human services courses. That's if how does this inform my practice? My practice right now is teaching. That's my practice. And so I'm trying to queer teaching practice. I'm trying to queer our social work and human service course. And that's about embedding more queer theory, more queer conversations into the course, not just in Queer Week. You know, not just having 1 week of it, but having those conversations ongoing.
Making it like something that's, I don't want to say normal, but like, something that's like more well integrated into social work education, because I didn't even know about like queer theory. In my first year, I don't really remember there being much about like a queer week, which was only like 3 years ago. So it's like, it's something that we need to work towards. And
absolutely. You know, I think things like pronouns matter, you know, and so I'm trying to get better at introducing myself with my pronouns, because that invites other people to do the same. Says to people that this is a conversation that we can have. Having case studies where, because, you know, social work education, we love our case studies, don't we? You know, and so having case studies where someone's queer, but that isn't their issue. It just happens to be part of who they are.
That would be refreshing,
wouldn't it? You know, or they come from a queer family, you know, but that isn't the problem that's to be fixed. So, you know, the conversation is about someone and they happen to have 2 mums, or, you know, whatever. And
would you say that there's a lot of assumptions around like children who grow up with parents who you know, identifies both the same gender or like transgender? Like, do you think that there's a lot of assumptions about the wellness of those children?
Yes, there are still those assumptions, and the research is really clear debunking those assumptions. The research actually very clearly says children of parents who identify as the same gender actually grow up with a greater understanding of diversity. They often feel more secure in their relationships. You know, there's this fear that they're going to grow up gay or something, but you know, A, why is that a fear? But B, most people who are gay have grown up with heterosexual parents, so it clearly isn't a genetic thing. You know? So it doesn't work the other way either.
And how have you seen other people use queer theory in their practice? Have you noticed anything that's like really cool or interesting of other people who might have used queer theory in their practice?
I mean, people are doing all kinds of really interesting stuff, you know, in terms of social work education. I mean, people are really starting to ask serious questions about social work education and how and the impacts on queer social work students of that heteronormative education. And I guess that's what kind of prompted an interest, you know, for me in me doing, you know, my PhD research. I'm looking at queer social work students in their social work education, and that's because that research hasn't been done in Australia yet. It's been done in the US and Canada. There's really some horrible stories, the experiences of people, the experiences of homophobia and cisgenderism from within their social work courses, you know. So that's really important work that's being done. But there's also, you know, there's people doing really interesting research, you know, all kinds of things, from, you know, researching, you know, the way space is used, you know, researching about family and different types of families, I recently read an article about discourses of femininity in snowboarding,
Wow.
people are using queer theory in all kinds of ways, yeah? And it's not just about how to work better with queer communities. Queer theory helps us to challenge normativity. And so it can be used beyond just working with queer communities, because it helps us ask questions about why is this seen to be normal.
I was just about to ask that, actually. Like, how can queer theory be used when working with other people who might be marginalised or oppressed that aren't necessarily queer?
So it becomes another tool in our practice framework, and so it helps to inform all of our practice. Feminist theories, if you think about feminist theories, they help us to challenge patriarchy, which then helps us to work not just with women, but also with men to recognise the negative impacts of patriarchy. So you can employ feminist practice in your work with men, because it's about understanding patriarchy. And so queer theory helps us to move beyond even that gendered thinking. So it moves beyond patriarchy, to challenge the impacts of hetero and cis normativity on all people. So beyond those binary genders or sexualities. And when we do that, everything changes. When we start asking questions about that, those really core things about how we see ourselves and how we move through the world, how our relationships are and why we have relationships with the people that we have. When we start asking ourselves those questions and throwing open the boundaries and the limits that have been put around that, it opens up a whole world of possibilities. And queer theory helps us ask those questions, because it says, actually, gender isn't understood in binary ways. Identity isn't understood in binary ways.
And what do you mean by binary, Jen?
One side usually good, one side usually bad, so male, female, binary, good, bad, social worker, client, queer, straight, those kind of binaries, and that's, the world is understood in those kind of ways, and usually they are hierarchical binaries, where one is good and one is bad, or one's dominant and one's subordinate, not good and bad, one's dominant and one's subordinate, and so challenging those binaries means that we're challenging everything. And queer theory helps us do that. Post-structuralism, postmodernism, critical theories help us do that too.
Do you think that queer theory is something that people need to pay more attention to in social work education? Yeah,
I definitely do. I think that it's not good enough to say, using critical theory, I can think about social justice and I can be anti-oppressive, and I can think about injustice. If you don't understand the basics of how some injustice works, then it's not on your radar. And so I think we need to kind of take a step back and go, let's talk about queer for a bit. And then we can bring queer into that bigger picture, but let's just talk about queer for a bit, in the same way that we need to talk about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander stuff, and go, no, actually there's some things that we just need to understand about injustice in that context, about racism and about whiteness and about privilege. And so we need to understand that, so then we can integrate that into our critical theory and critical practice. But we need to actually have the conversations and understand it better first. And so we need to do the same with all things queer.
I definitely think that students could really benefit from having more conversations about queer theory, like while they're at uni, before they go into practice. It would be more beneficial for them to learn it before. I really appreciate having this conversation with you and learning more about queer theory and how you use it in your practice, and how queer theory is something that's useful for challenging like heteronormative assumptions or challenging things that maybe haven't been questioned before. And it's really interesting to know that it can be used like when working with other people as well.
And I think that queer theory itself has moved beyond just thinking about diverse genders and sexes and sexualities to thinking about, because people talk about a post-queer theory, and so talking about race and nationalism and and colonialism, talking about a whole range of other ideas as well through a queer theory lens. Yeah, saying we need to think about intersectionality in our queer theorizing.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, we're just about out of time, Jen, but I was just wondering if there's any
there's something that I wanted to say that I kind of zipped over and then we got onto something else.
Definitely fine.
So and it is actually something important that I want to kind of say, and it was about going back to that, how do we use it or how do I use it in practice, and it's about trying to hold the space open for queer conversations in my teaching, and that means that it's not always comfortable. And I think I really want to acknowledge that queer students often carry the brunt of that discomfort as other students ask questions and challenge some of those previously held ideas. And queer students are sitting there, and so we talk about critical teaching and learning spaces being brave spaces. That's some of the language that we use. But we don't always acknowledge that it's the queer students who are needing to be really brave, to sit through those conversations. We kind of frame it in the context of people being brave enough to challenge their previously held ideas, to challenge dominant discourses. But we don't think about what's happening on, to the people who are being talked about.
It's often like, I can imagine it would be like very uncomfortable, like if you've maybe had a very negative experience with your sexuality or your gender, and then you have other students who are talking about it, I guess respectfully, but it can still I guess bring up emotions. And I guess my question is, what can students do when those things arise? Like, are there some, I guess, practical things students can do when talking about it in those big spaces?
I think for me, it's about recognizing that there is an impact, and there's an impact too, not just when the conversation happens, but when there's a silence left by a conversation that should have been had and wasn't. And queer students carry that discomfort. And for me as an educator, so rather than respond to what students should do, I'm going to respond to what educators should do, because educators facilitate those brave spaces. And so as educators, we need to be better at recognizing that impact. And we need to take the load off queer students. We need to recognise that they are brave, and we need to heal that hurt. And I think for students, it is about having the conversations. It's still about asking the questions, because that's how learning happens. But it's about being respectful. It's about critical practice is about doing the work, isn't it? Critical practice isn't easy. It's about doing the work. It's not taking the easy path. And sometimes it might be about getting it wrong in the effort to get it right. And so being able to hold that's where critical reflection comes in. Good old critical reflection that we talk about a lot.
Thank you so much for that, Jen. Is there any final thoughts that you'd like to leave with us today?
I think I've talked enough.
Thank you so much for
Thanks, Angela.
To us about queer theory and how you use it in your practice. It's, I've definitely learnt a lot from talking to you, and I really
enjoyed it.
Yeah, hopefully we can have you again on the podcast for another conversation.
Absolutely, anytime.
Thank you so much. Have a great day.
All right, you too. Cheers.
Bye.
See ya.
If you'd like to keep up with any of our socials and to continue listening to future episodes, please follow us on Instagram. That's Critical Conversations, the number 4 SW.